The morning Claire forced herself into the billionaire's wedding suite, her hands were trembling so violently she could barely grip the door handle, because what she was about to ask him to do would either save his daughter's life or destroy everything he'd built in the next 2 hours. Claire Donovan had been cleaning the Ashford estate for 3 years, long enough to know every creak in the marble floors and every shadow that didn't belong. She'd watched little 7-year-old Emma grow from a grief-stricken child who barely spoke after losing her mother into a bright girl who finally smiled again. She'd seen Marcus Ashford, the tech billionaire whose company revolutionized data security, transform from a broken widower into a man who believed he'd found love again. But this morning, standing outside his bedroom door while champagne glasses clinked downstairs and wedding coordinators shouted instructions, Claire knew the truth that would shatter him. The woman he was about to marry in 4 hours wasn't who she claimed to be. Victoria Sterling had entered their lives 8 months ago at a charity gala, stunning in emerald silk, with perfectly practiced sympathy for Marcus's loss and an uncanny ability to make Emma laugh. She'd moved through their world like she belonged there, learning the security codes, befriending Marcus's business partners, positioning herself as the missing piece of their broken family. Claire had wanted to believe in the fairy tale. God knows Marcus and Emma deserved happiness after the car accident that took Sarah Ashford 2 years prior. But 3 nights ago, Claire had been restocking towels in the East Wing bathroom when she'd heard Victoria's voice through the ventilation shaft, cold and calculating as winter steel. The prenup's airtight, but it doesn't matter, Victoria had said into her phone, her charity gala sweetness completely gone. Once we're married, I'll have access to the corporate accounts within 6 months. Marcus trusts me completely now. And the girl, Emma's going to boarding school in Switzerland whether she likes it or not. She's just dead weight, and honestly, she creeps me out with those big sad eyes. Claire had pressed herself against the bathroom wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Victoria continued, detailing a plan that involved forged documents, strategic corporate votes, and business partners who were already compromised. By this time next year, Ashford security will be mine, and Marcus will be exactly where I need him, too proud to admit he was conned, too broken to fight back. Men like him always fall the hardest. For 3 days, Claire had wrestled with what to do. She was a maid, a single mother herself, barely keeping her head above water with medical bills from her son's asthma treatments. Who would believe her over a woman like Victoria Sterling, with her Ivy League credentials and society connections? She'd tried approaching Marcus yesterday, but Victoria had been there, always there, her arm linked through his, her laughter filling the spaces where truth might have landed. The security team loved Victoria. The household staff thought Claire was jealous. Even Marcus's business partner, Richard Chen, had told her to stop creating drama on such a happy occasion. But last night, Claire had found Emma crying in the library, clutching a photo of her real mother. "Daddy says Victoria will be my new mom," the little girl had whispered, tears streaking her face. "But she told me yesterday that I'm spoiled and I need to learn discipline at a real school far away." She said Daddy agreed already. The betrayal in those 7-year-old eyes had cut through every doubt Claire had left. So now she stood here, outside Marcus Ashford's door, knowing what she had to ask him was insane. She'd spent the night forming a plan, desperate, theatrical, maybe impossible, but it was the only way to expose Victoria before legal documents were signed and Emma's fate was sealed. She needed Marcus to trust her completely. She needed him to do something so outrageous that Victoria would reveal her true nature in the chaos. Claire knocked, her knuckles barely making a sound against the heavy oak. When Marcus opened the door, he was half-dressed in his tuxedo, his dark hair still damp from the shower, his expression already tired from the morning's coordination chaos. At 42, he was still striking, with the kind of sharp features and commanding presence that made boardrooms go silent, but there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Claire? Is everything okay?" His voice carried genuine concern. That was the thing about Marcus Ashford, for all his billions, he'd never treated her as invisible. He knew her son's name was Tyler. He'd given her Christmas bonuses that covered 3 months of rent. He was a good man, which made what Victoria was doing to him even more cruel. "Mr. Ashford, I need 5 minutes. Please. It's about Emma." Claire's voice cracked on his daughter's name, and something in Marcus's expression shifted immediately. He stepped back, letting her enter, closing the door behind her. The words tumbled out, the overheard conversation, Victoria's real plans, the danger Emma was in, the corporate theft being orchestrated. Marcus listened, his face growing paler with each sentence, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. When Claire finished, the silence stretched so long she thought he might call security. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" His voice was barely above a whisper, devastated. "I tried. Victoria's always there. And sir, I know how this sounds. I know my word against hers seems impossible." Marcus turned away, running his hands through his hair. "God, I've been so blind. Richard warned me I was rushing things, but I thought Emma needed a mother. I thought I was doing the right thing." "There's a way to prove it," Claire said, her heart pounding. "But you have to trust me completely, and you have to do something that will seem absolutely crazy." Marcus turned back, and in his eyes, she saw the same fierce protectiveness she felt for her own child. "What do you need?" Claire took a deep breath and laid out her plan, watching his expression shift from shock to understanding to grim determination. It was reckless and dangerous and required perfect timing, but it was the only way to make Victoria reveal herself before it was too late. By the time Claire finished explaining, Marcus was nodding slowly, already mentally preparing for the performance of his life. "If you're wrong about this, I'll look like a fool," he said quietly. "But if you're right, you'll have saved my daughter's life and everything I've built. Either way, Claire, I trust you." Those words settled into Claire's chest like an anchor. Someone finally believed her. Now came the hardest part, convincing a wedding full of 200 guests and one dangerous woman that Marcus Ashford had just suffered a catastrophic medical emergency that would change everything, and they had exactly 3 hours to set the trap that would expose the truth before signatures made Victoria's theft permanent. The scream that tore through the Ashford estate at 11:30 that morning was so convincing that 3 guests dropped their mimosas and the wedding planner actually dialed 911 before Claire stopped her. Mr. Ashford collapsed, Claire gasped, stumbling into the main hall where early arriving guests were already gathering, her face sheet-white with practiced terror. "He can't move, something's wrong with his legs. He's conscious but he can't feel anything below his waist. The ambulance is coming but he's asking for Victoria. Please, someone get Victoria." The chaos that erupted was exactly what they'd planned. Guests rushed toward the east wing. The wedding coordinator began frantically calling vendors. And Victoria Sterling, who'd been in the bride's suite having her hair woven with actual diamonds, came running in her silk robe, her face a perfect mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. Claire watched those eyes carefully as Victoria pushed through the crowd, and there, just for a second, was something that looked almost like calculation before the worried fiancé expression slammed back into place. Marcus was in his study, slumped in his wheelchair that they'd pulled from storage, the same chair he'd used for 2 weeks after a skiing accident 5 years ago. He'd positioned himself behind his desk, his lower body covered with a blanket, his face deliberately ashen. When Victoria burst through the door, he looked up at her with an expression of such convincing devastation that even Claire almost believed he was truly injured. "Marcus, oh my God, what happened?" Victoria rushed to his side, and Claire noticed how her hands hovered over him without quite touching, like she was afraid of contamination rather than worried about causing pain. "I don't know. I was getting dressed and suddenly, nothing. My legs just gave out." Marcus's voice shook perfectly. "Victoria, the doctors are coming but they said it might be a stroke or a spinal event. They don't know yet. Everything for today, we have to cancel. I can't marry you like this." There it was. Claire saw Victoria's face do something complicated, a flash of panic, quickly smothered. "Don't say that. We'll postpone, that's all. What matters is getting you help. The contracts, Marcus said, reaching for her hand with a grip that looked desperate but was actually testing. The merger documents we were going to sign after the ceremony, Richard has them. We might need to delay the whole corporate restructuring. I can't think straight right now. Victoria's fingers tightened on his, and her voice took on a soothing tone that felt rehearsed. Don't worry about business right now. Let's just focus on your health. Where's Emma? With her grandmother, thank God. I don't want her seeing me like this. Marcus slumped further, the picture of a broken man, and Claire had to admire his acting. He'd spent 30 years building a tech empire through negotiations and boardroom battles. He knew exactly how to read people and how to make them reveal themselves. The paramedics arrived within minutes, actually 2 of Marcus's security team members dressed in EMT uniforms, part of the elaborate setup. They examined him with serious expressions, asked questions about sensation and movement, and finally announced he needed immediate transport to Pacific Medical Center for imaging and neurological assessment. Victoria insisted on riding with him, playing the devoted fiancée perfectly, but Claire saw how her eyes kept darting to Marcus's phone on the desk, to the papers scattered there, calculating her next move. Claire, can you handle things here? Marcus asked, his voice weak. Let the guests know we're postponing. Tell Richard I'll call him later about the business matters. Of course, Mr. Ashford. Claire met his eyes briefly, and in that moment, they confirmed what they both now knew. Victoria hadn't once asked about his pain level, hadn't shed a single real tear, and her first concern after his supposed medical emergency had been about the corporate contracts. A woman truly in love would have fallen apart. Victoria Sterling was annoyed. As they wheeled Marcus out, Claire watched Victoria follow, her diamond-studded heels clicking on the marble with military precision. The guests clustered in worried groups, some crying, some calling family members with the dramatic update. The wedding coordinator sat in a chair looking shell-shocked, surrounded by vendor contracts and seating charts that were now meaningless. It was a convincing disaster. But Claire's real work was just beginning. While everyone was distracted, she slipped back into the East Wing, into the suite of rooms Victoria had been occupying for the past month. She had maybe 20 minutes before anyone noticed her absence. Her hands were steadier now, her purpose clear. Victoria had been careful, but not careful enough. Somewhere in these rooms was evidence of the real plan, the documents, the communications, the proof they needed. Claire had cleaned these rooms 100 times. She knew Victoria kept her laptop in the Louis Vuitton bag under the bed, password protected but often left open when she was home. She knew about the false bottom in the jewelry box where Victoria stored her real phone, not the iPhone she showed Marcus, but a burner with the contacts and messages that would tell the true story. Claire had watched enough crime shows with her son Tyler to know that criminals always kept insurance, some record of their schemes in case they needed leverage later. The jewelry box sat on the dresser, innocent and elegant. Claire's fingers found the catch that released the false bottom, and there it was, a cheap Android phone, the kind you bought with cash at convenience stores. She powered it on, and her heart nearly stopped at the messages that appeared. Victoria had been texting someone named D for weeks. The messages were a roadmap of manipulation. M signed the insurance update today, doesn't suspect anything. Emma's school application submitted, he thinks it's for summer programs. Corporate board votes secured, 3 members already compromised. Claire photographed every message with shaking hands, forwarding them to her own phone. There were emails too, opened in a browser, communication with offshore accounts, with lawyers, with people who clearly weren't guests at today's wedding. Victoria Sterling wasn't even her real name. The woman Marcus had fallen for was actually Victoria Morse, and she had a history of targeting wealthy widowers, according to the private investigation report Claire found saved in the phone's files. Someone had been investigating her, but the report was dated 3 days ago, addressed to an email Claire didn't recognize. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent Claire's pulse skyrocketing. She quickly replaced the phone, closed the jewelry box, and grabbed a stack of towels she'd strategically placed earlier. When Victoria's assistant Lauren appeared in the doorway, Claire was calmly folding linens. "Claire, what are you doing in here?" "Miss Sterling asked me to pack some of her things to bring to the hospital," Claire lied smoothly. "Mr. Ashford might be there for days. She'll need clothes." Lauren nodded, already distracted by her own phone. "This is such a nightmare. 200 guests to contact, deposits we'll never get back." She walked away still complaining, and Claire's hands finally started shaking again with relief. She had the evidence now, stored safely in her phone. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. They needed Victoria to reveal herself, to show her true face in a way that couldn't be explained away or spun into some misunderstanding. They needed her to make a move, to show her hand completely, and Marcus's supposed paralysis was the bait that would force exactly that, because nothing revealed a person's true character faster than watching how they treated someone when that person could no longer be useful, and Victoria Sterling was about to walk directly into a trap built from her own greed and cruelty, with Emma's future hanging in the balance. Pacific Medical Center's private wing was where billionaires went to suffer in comfort, and Marcus Ashford's room looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital space, which made it the perfect stage for Victoria's mask to finally crack. Marcus had been admitted for 6 hours now, long enough for test results to supposedly come back inconclusive, long enough for Victoria's patience to visibly thin. Claire had positioned herself as his private duty nurse, a role the real hospital staff accepted because Marcus's security team had arranged everything in advance. She moved through the room adjusting pillows and checking monitors that weren't actually connected to anything, watching Victoria watch Marcus with eyes that grew colder by the hour. "The neurologist said it could be temporary," Victoria was saying into her phone, standing by the window with her back to Marcus. Her voice carried that same manufactured concern, but her free hand was clenched so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Yes, I know the merger vote is scheduled for Monday. I'm aware of the timeline, Richard. Marcus is conscious and lucid. He can still sign documents." Claire saw Marcus's eyes flicker behind his supposedly pain-medicated haze. Richard Chen was Victoria's target too, apparently, Marcus's business partner who'd been acting strange for weeks. Now they knew why. Victoria had gotten to him somehow, probably the same way she'd infiltrated everything else in Marcus's life, through careful manipulation and strategic pressure. When Victoria ended the call, she returned to Marcus's bedside with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard sends his best. He's handling the business matters, so you don't need to worry about anything except getting better." "The wedding," Marcus mumbled, playing his role with devastating accuracy. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Victoria. This should have been the happiest day." "Shoo, don't apologize. These things happen." Victoria smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the gesture almost mechanical. "We'll reschedule once you're recovered. Everything will be fine." But her phone buzzed again, and this time when she looked at it, her expression went completely flat. She glanced at Marcus, confirmed he appeared to be dozing, and stepped into the private bathroom to take the call. The bathroom door didn't close completely, Claire had made sure of that, loosening the latch earlier. Through the gap, she could hear Victoria's voice, low and vicious, all pretense finally abandoned. "This is a disaster. No, you don't understand, if he's actually paralyzed, the corporate structure changes. The board of directors gets more control. I needed him healthy and compliant, not stuck in a wheelchair needing caretakers." Silence as the person on the other end spoke. Then Victoria's sharp laugh, cruel and utterly devoid of the warmth she'd shown Marcus for 8 months. "The kid? Who cares about the kid? Emma was always just collateral. If Marcus is disabled, she becomes even more of a liability. We might need to accelerate the Swiss boarding school timeline, get her out of the country before anyone starts asking questions." Claire's hands froze on the medication tray. Beside her, she felt Marcus tense beneath his sheets, though his eyes remained closed. They'd expected Victoria to be cold. They hadn't expected her to sound so casually monstrous about a 7-year-old child. "Listen to me," Victoria continued, her voice dropping even lower. Marcus Ashford was supposed to be the easy target. Grieving widower, isolated, desperate for his daughter to have a mother figure, textbook vulnerable. I spent 8 months playing the perfect girlfriend, smiling at that annoying child's stupid drawings, pretending to care about his boring tech company. The payoff was supposed to be 50 million minimum once I had access to the accounts. I'm not walking away from this because he had a convenient medical crisis. The person on the other end said something that made Victoria pause. When she spoke again, there was something darker in her tone, something that made Claire's blood run cold. There are ways to handle this. Disabled men have accidents all the time, especially when they're dependent on caretakers. Medication mix-ups, falls, infections, hospitals are dangerous places. And grieving widows with power of attorney have a lot of control over estates, especially when the only heir is a minor child who's conveniently out of the country. We just need to be patient and strategic. Claire's heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone in the wing could hear it. This wasn't just fraud or theft anymore. Victoria was talking about murder, about eliminating Marcus and isolating Emma, about a plan so cold-blooded it seemed impossible that the woman who'd laughed at family dinners and helped Emma with homework could even conceive it. Marcus's eyes opened then, and Claire saw in them a rage so fierce it was almost frightening. But he didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at Claire with an expression that said everything: "Record this, document this, make sure this monster never touches my daughter." Claire already had her phone recording, hidden in her scrub pocket, capturing every word. But they needed more. They needed Victoria to act, to do something so undeniably criminal that there would be no lawyer alive who could spin it as a misunderstanding. Victoria emerged from the bathroom, her public face smoothly back in place, all traces of that vicious conversation erased. She smiled at Marcus's supposedly sleeping form, then turned to Claire with manufactured sweetness. "I'm going to step out for a bit, get some air, maybe grab dinner. Can you make sure he's comfortable? The doctor said the pain medication might make him confused, so don't worry if he says anything strange." Something about the way she emphasized those last words made Claire's skin crawl. It was a preemptive strike, a way to discredit anything Marcus might say later. "Of course, Miss Sterling. I'll take excellent care of him." Victoria left, her heels clicking down the hospital corridor with purpose. The moment the elevator doors closed, Marcus sat up, all pretense of injury gone, his face hard as granite. "She just threatened my life. In a hospital. While I'm supposedly helpless." His voice was controlled but Claire could hear the fury beneath it. "And Emma, God, she talked about Emma like she was a problem to eliminate." "I got it all recorded," Claire confirmed, pulling out her phone. "But Mr. Ashford, we need to be careful. If she's talking about what she said, then we're not just dealing with fraud. This is attempted murder, conspiracy. We need to get law enforcement involved now." "Not yet." Marcus swung his legs off the bed, standing up, pacing the private room like a caged predator. "If we go to the police now with just a recording, she'll lawyer up, claim it was taken out of context, say she was joking or venting. We need her to actually do something, to make a move that's undeniable." "You want to use yourself as bait." Claire felt sick saying it out loud. "It's the only way. Victoria's smart, she won't do anything obvious. But if she thinks I'm vulnerable, truly helpless, she'll get sloppy. People like her always do when they think they've won." Marcus turned to Claire, and his expression softened slightly. "You could walk away right now. You've done more than anyone could ask. You've got Tyler to think about, your own life." "Emma's 7 years old," Claire interrupted quietly. "The same age Tyler was when his father left us. I know what it's like to feel abandoned and scared. I'm not walking away from her." Marcus nodded slowly, something like respect and gratitude crossing his face. Then we do this together. But Claire, if Victoria is willing to talk about murder, she's dangerous in ways I didn't fully understand. We need to set a trap she can't resist, something that forces her hand completely. What did you have in mind? Marcus's smile was grim. The one thing Victoria wants more than anything, corporate control and access to the money. We're going to give her exactly what she wants, or make her think we are, and when she reaches for it, we'll have everything we need to bury her. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that looked almost like fire, and somewhere in this building, Victoria Sterling was making calls and adjusting her plans, completely unaware that the helpless billionaire she just threatened was about to turn her own greed into the weapon that would destroy her. But first they had to survive whatever move Victoria made next, and time was running out because Emma was coming home from her grandmother's house tomorrow, and every instinct Claire had was screaming that Victoria wouldn't wait much longer before making her play. The moment Emma Ashford walked through the hospital room door the next morning and saw her father in a wheelchair, her face crumpled with a grief so raw it broke something in Claire's chest. "Daddy?" The 7-year-old's voice was barely a whisper. She stood frozen in the doorway, her grandmother Margaret's hand on her shoulder, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, the same rabbit Sarah Ashford had given her daughter 3 days before the accident. Emma's dark hair was in pigtails, and she was wearing the yellow dress Sarah had bought on their last shopping trip together. The child looked small and terrified and far too familiar with loss. Marcus's face transformed completely. Whatever cold calculation had been there moments before vanished, replaced by pure paternal love mixed with the agony of what he was putting his daughter through. "Come here, sweetheart. It's okay. Daddy's okay." Emma ran to him then, careful not to bump his legs, climbing into his lap in the wheelchair with a practiced gentleness that suggested she'd already learned how to be afraid of hurting people she loved. She buried her face in his chest, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Claire had to turn away, pretending to organize supplies, because watching this little girl's world crack apart again was almost unbearable. Margaret Ashford stood in the doorway, 73 years old and elegant even in her grief, her silver hair perfectly styled, her blue eyes sharp and assessing. She'd been Sarah's mother, and Claire knew she blamed Marcus for the accident even though it had been a drunk driver who'd killed her daughter. Margaret's gaze swept the room, landing on Claire, then moving to where Victoria had just appeared from the hallway with coffee and croissants like she'd been the dutiful fiancée all along. "Mrs. Ashford," Victoria said warmly, moving forward with open arms. "I'm so glad you could bring Emma. Marcus has been asking for her." Margaret's expression didn't soften. "I'm sure he has. Though I'm surprised the wedding planner didn't call me until 3 hours after Marcus's collapse. Almost like someone didn't want me arriving too quickly." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Victoria's smile tightened. "It was chaos, as you can imagine. We were trying to reach everyone. I was second on the emergency contact list after you," Margaret interrupted quietly. "Sarah made sure of that before she died. She wanted me close to Emma, always. Strange that I had to hear about my son-in-law's medical crisis from a caterer." Claire watched the exchange with growing admiration. Margaret Ashford might have complicated history with Marcus, but she was nobody's fool. She'd picked up on something wrong immediately, and the way her eyes kept moving to Victoria suggested she had suspicions of her own. "Emma, honey," Victoria said, switching tactics, kneeling beside the wheelchair with practiced gentleness. "I know this is scary, but your daddy's going to be fine. And I'm here to help take care of both of you. We're going to be a family, remember?" Emma lifted her tear-stained face and looked at Victoria with an expression that held none of the trust and warmth she'd shown in recent months. "Are you still sending me to Switzerland?" The question landed like a bomb. Victoria's carefully constructed expression flickered. "Sweetie, we talked about this. That was just, we were discussing educational opportunities. You said I was spoiled and needed discipline." Emma's voice was stronger now, fueled by a 7-year-old sense of injustice. You said Daddy already agreed. But Daddy told me yesterday he didn't know anything about Switzerland. So one of you is lying. Marcus's arms tightened around his daughter, and Claire saw Margaret's expression sharpen into something fierce and protective. Victoria stood up quickly, her smile straining. Children sometimes misunderstand adult conversations. I'm not a baby. Emma's chin lifted, and in that moment, she looked exactly like her late mother in the photos throughout the Ashford estate, stubborn, brave, refusing to be dismissed. I know what you said. And I know you're different when Daddy's not watching. You're mean. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. Victoria's mask slipped for just a second, something cold flashing across her face before she caught herself. But Margaret had seen it. Claire had seen it. And most importantly, Marcus had seen it, his daughter confirming everything they'd suspected about how Victoria treated her when no adults were present. Emma, that's not appropriate, Victoria began. No, she's right to speak up, Margaret cut in, moving to stand beside the wheelchair, positioning herself between Victoria and her granddaughter. Emma, sweetheart, has Miss Sterling been unkind to you? You can tell grandmother. It's safe. Emma looked at her father, seeking permission. Marcus nodded gently, his jaw tight. When Emma spoke again, her words tumbled out in a rush, all the small cruelties Victoria had inflicted when Marcus wasn't present. The harsh comments about Emma being too clingy. The way Victoria had thrown away Sarah's photos from Emma's room, claiming they were unhealthy for moving forward. The punishments for small infractions, punishments Marcus had never authorized. The constant reminders that Emma needed to grow up and stop being such a baby about everything. Each revelation landed like a physical blow. Marcus's face had gone white, and Claire realized he was struggling with something beyond just anger. He was grappling with the guilt of having brought this woman into his daughter's life, of having been so blinded by loneliness and hope that he'd missed the signs of Emma's suffering. Victoria, to her credit, tried to maintain composure. These are exaggerations. Emma's been acting out since the engagement. It's normal for children to resist change. I don't believe you, Margaret said flatly. I've known Emma since the day she was born. She doesn't lie. And something about you has bothered me since the moment we met, Miss Sterling. You're too smooth, too practiced, like someone playing a role rather than living a life. The confrontation was escalating faster than they'd planned. Claire saw Marcus signal her subtly. They needed to de-escalate before Victoria ran. But before anyone could intervene, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and something in her expression changed, a flicker of genuine alarm. I need to take this, she said tersely, stepping out of the room without waiting for permission. The moment she was gone, Margaret turned to Marcus with eyes that blazed. Marcus, what's really going on? And don't tell me nothing. I raised a daughter and buried her. I know when men are lying. Marcus glanced at Emma, then at his former mother-in-law. Mom, I need you to trust me. Can you take Emma down to the cafeteria? Get her some ice cream? I promise I'll explain everything, but not here, not now. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 1 hour. Then you tell me everything, or I'm taking Emma home with me and calling lawyers. She held out her hand to Emma. Come on, sweetheart. Let's get chocolate chip. Emma hesitated, looking at her father with worry that no 7-year-old should have to carry. You're going to be okay, Daddy? Promise? I promise, baby girl. And I promise that everything's going to be okay. Daddy's going to fix this. After they left, Claire finally spoke, her voice low and urgent. She knows something's wrong. Margaret's going to complicate things. Maybe that's good, Marcus said quietly. Margaret's a lawyer, retired, but still sharp as hell. And she has standing to fight for Emma if something happens to me. We might need her. Through the small window in the hospital room door, Claire could see Victoria in the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply. Whatever conversation she was having, it wasn't going well. When Victoria finally returned, her composed mask was back, but there was something brittle underneath it now, like she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "I need to handle some business matters," she announced. "Richard needs documents signed for the merger vote tomorrow. Marcus, I know you're not feeling well, but this is time-sensitive. Can you sign power of attorney so I can handle these corporate issues while you recover?" There it was. The move they'd been waiting for, laid out so blatantly it was almost insulting. Victoria wanted legal authority over Marcus's business decisions, wanted it badly enough to ask while he was supposedly incapacitated and vulnerable. Marcus looked at her with an expression of perfect trust, even as Claire felt her stomach turn at what came next. "Of course. Anything you need. I'm sorry I'm putting so much burden on you." Victoria's smile finally reached her eyes, but it wasn't warmth that lit them, it was triumph, cold and calculating, the look of a predator who thought she'd finally cornered her prey. And in the hallway outside, Margaret Ashford stood with her granddaughter eating ice cream, but her sharp lawyer's mind was already working through everything wrong with this picture, because the trap was set, the bait was taken, and tomorrow morning Victoria Sterling would walk into Marcus's study to sign documents she thought gave her control of a fortune, having no idea that the supposedly paralyzed billionaire and the maid she dismissed as irrelevant had spent the night preparing to expose her so completely that no amount of charm or manipulation could save her. Marcus's home study at 8 o'clock the next morning looked exactly like what it was, the room where a desperate woman was about to legally sign away any pretense of innocence. Claire had spent the night preparing for this moment, working with Marcus's actual lawyers to create documents that looked legitimate but were actually elaborate proof of intent. The power of attorney papers Victoria was coming to sign were real enough, they'd hold up in court. But buried in the language were clauses that would require Victoria to explicitly state her intentions, to confirm her understanding that these documents gave her control over Emma's trust fund, over Marcus's medical decisions, over the corporate voting shares that could shift control of Ashford's security. Every signature would be an admission, every initial a documented step toward fraud, theft, and conspiracy. The room was wired like a movie set. Cameras hidden in the bookshelf, in the desk lamp, in the frame of Sarah's portrait that still hung above the fireplace. Audio recording devices that Marcus's security team had installed overnight. This wasn't just about catching Victoria in the act anymore, this was about creating evidence so ironclad that no judge, no jury, no clever lawyer could explain it away. Marcus sat behind his desk in his wheelchair, playing the part of the broken man perfectly. He'd even practiced the slight tremor in his hands, the way someone with nerve damage might struggle with fine motor control. Claire stood to the side, her maid's uniform making her invisible in the way domestic workers so often were, her phone recording everything as backup to the professional equipment. When Victoria arrived, she was dressed for business, a severe black suit, her hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. She looked every inch the corporate player, and Claire realized this was Victoria's real self emerging, the ambitious shark underneath the charitable society girlfriend costume. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose, her earlier warmth completely stripped away. "Good morning, Marcus," Victoria said briskly. "I have the documents. I've taken the liberty of having our legal team review everything. Given your condition, we need to move quickly on the corporate restructuring." "Our legal team?" Marcus asked mildly. "I wasn't aware we'd merged law firms." Victoria's smile was professional, empty. "Just a figure of speech. Your lawyers prepared these, of course, with input from Richard regarding the corporate matters. Everything standard." She spread the documents across the desk: power of attorney, corporate proxy forms, amended trust documents for Emma's inheritance, medical decision-making authority. It was a comprehensive transfer of control, and Victoria handled each paper like she'd been studying them for weeks, which she probably had. "If you'll just sign here, here, and initial here," Victoria pointed with a manicured finger. "This gives me the authority to act on your behalf while you're recovering." The doctor said it might be months before you regain full function, if at all. We can't let the business suffer in the meantime. There was no false sympathy in her voice now, no pretense of concern for Marcus's well-being. She was all business, eager to close the deal, and Claire saw Marcus notice that shift, saw the confirmation settle in his expression that the woman he'd almost married had never loved him at all. What about Emma? Marcus asked, his hand hovering over the first signature line. These trust documents, they change the terms of Sarah's provisions for our daughter. Just temporarily, Victoria said smoothly. Given your incapacity, we need someone who can make financial decisions for Emma's benefit. I would never do anything that wasn't in her best interest, Marcus. You know that. The lie was so blatant, so perfectly delivered, that Claire felt anger burn through her chest. This woman had threatened Emma, called her collateral, discussed sending her away and isolating her, and now she stood here claiming maternal concern with a straight face. Marcus picked up the pen, his hand shaking slightly. I need to understand exactly what I'm signing. This clause here, it gives you authority to enroll Emma in educational institutions of your choosing without my approval? Standard guardianship language, Victoria said, a hint of impatience creeping into her tone. In case decisions need to be made quickly while you're incapacitated. Like enrolling her in boarding school in Switzerland? The room went completely silent. Victoria's expression froze, her mask cracking just slightly. I don't know what you... The applications are already submitted, Marcus continued, his voice still mild but his eyes sharp now, watching her. I found them in your email. Interesting that you'd apply to schools for my daughter without discussing it with me first. Victoria recovered quickly, too quickly for someone who should have been surprised. Those were just exploratory. I thought having options might be helpful given the circumstances. What circumstances, exactly? Your illness, obviously. Emma might benefit from structure and... She's 7 years old. She just lost her mother 2 years ago. And you think the appropriate response to her father becoming disabled is to ship her to another country? Marcus's voice was harder now, and Claire saw Victoria realize she was losing control of the conversation. Marcus, you're not thinking clearly. The medication. My mind is perfectly clear, Victoria. Clearer than it's been in months, actually. Marcus set down the pen without signing anything. Let's talk about what these documents really do. This power of attorney, it gives you control of my medical care, doesn't it? For your protection. Or to make sure I can't contradict any decisions you make. This corporate proxy, it lets you vote my shares in tomorrow's board meeting, the one where Richard is proposing a restructuring that would effectively give you and him controlling interest in Ashford Security. And these trust amendments, they don't just give you authority over Emma's finances, they give you the ability to contest Sarah's original wishes for our daughter's care. Victoria's composure was slipping visibly now. You're paranoid. The stress of your condition is making you. I'm not paralyzed, Victoria. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Marcus stood up from the wheelchair, smooth and easy, no tremor in his hands, no weakness in his legs. He walked around the desk, and Victoria stumbled backward, her face going pale. What? How? You've been lying this whole time. Testing you, Marcus corrected. And you failed spectacularly. See, a woman who actually loved me would have been concerned about my well-being, about my pain, about what this meant for our future together. But you, Victoria, you saw an opportunity. A disabled husband you could control, a little girl you could isolate, and access to a fortune you've been planning to steal for months. That's insane. You have no proof. Actually, we have extensive proof. Claire stepped forward, no longer invisible, holding up her phone. Including your phone conversation at the hospital where you discussed having Marcus killed and Emma sent to Switzerland. Including the burner phone in your jewelry box with months of communications documenting your real plans. Including the private investigation report showing you're not even Victoria Sterling, you're Victoria Morse, and you've run this same con on 3 other wealthy men in the last 6 years. Victoria's face went from pale to flushed, her eyes darting between Marcus and Claire, calculating her options. You can't use that. Illegal recording, invasion of privacy. One-party consent state, Marcus said calmly. Claire was part of the conversation, so the hospital recording is perfectly legal. And the rest? Well, once law enforcement gets involved, they'll find plenty of admissible evidence. The forged references, the fabricated background, the offshore accounts, the compromised board members. Richard's already cooperating, by the way. He's not as committed to this scheme as you thought. Turns out embezzlement charges are excellent motivation for honesty. The last piece of Victoria's composure shattered. Her sophisticated mask fell away completely, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. You arrogant bastard. You have no idea what it's like to claw your way up from nothing, to watch people like you inherit fortunes you never earned. So you decided to steal from a widower and traumatize his daughter? Claire's voice was quiet but fierce. Emma is 7 years old. She's not collateral or dead weight or an obstacle. She's a child who already lost her mother, and you were planning to take her father too and destroy her life. That spoiled brat has everything handed to her. She's a child. Marcus's controlled facade cracked, real anger burning through. Whatever justifications you've told yourself, whatever resentment fuels this, none of it excuses targeting a 7-year-old girl who never did anything to you. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Victoria spin around. Margaret Ashford appeared in the doorway, her lawyer's instincts perfectly timed, with 2 police officers behind her and Emma safely with a trusted nanny upstairs. Margaret's expression was ice and satisfaction. Ms. Morse, she said formally, these officers have some questions about fraud, attempted corporate theft, and conspiracy. I believe you'll want to exercise your right to remain silent and contact an attorney. Victoria looked trapped, cornered, her schemes collapsing around her in real time, but even now she tried one last manipulation, turning to Marcus with desperate tears that might have worked weeks ago, before he'd seen her true face and before Claire had risked everything to show him the truth about the woman who'd almost destroyed his family, and the documents on the desk sat and signed. Nothing but evidence now of crimes attempted but not completed, while somewhere upstairs Emma played with her rabbit, not yet knowing that her father and the maid she'd always trusted had just saved her from a nightmare dressed in designer clothes and practiced smiles. The police station interrogation room 3 hours later was nothing like the movies. It was smaller, brighter, and filled with the kind of institutional emptiness that made lies sound even hollower than usual. Claire sat beside Marcus in a witness room, both of them giving statements to Detective Sarah Patel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd been with the Financial Crimes Unit for 15 years. She'd seen cases like this before, wealthy targets, sophisticated fraudsters, elaborate cons, but even she seemed impressed by the scope of Victoria's scheme. So let me make sure I have this straight, Detective Patel said, reviewing her notes. Ms. Morse, we're calling her Morse now since Sterling was one of several aliases, spent 8 months infiltrating Mr. Ashford's life, cultivating relationships with his business partners, positioning herself for both personal and corporate theft, and the only reason we caught her was because Ms. Donovan here overheard a conversation through a bathroom vent. That's correct, Claire confirmed, her hands wrapped around a terrible station coffee that she wasn't drinking. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past 3 days was wearing off, leaving her shaky and exhausted. She was on the phone. She thought she was alone. And you came to Mr. Ashford with this information, he believed you, which honestly is remarkable in itself. Most wealthy targets dismiss staff concerns, and together you orchestrated an elaborate sting operation involving fake paralysis and wired rooms. I know it sounds extreme, Marcus said quietly. But Victoria was smart. If we'd just confronted her with accusations, she would have disappeared or lawyered up. We needed her to reveal herself, to document intent so clearly that no jury could doubt what she was planning. Detective Patel nodded slowly. Well, it worked. We've now got her burner phone, which your tech team was kind enough to help us access legally with proper warrants. The messages on there are damning: communication with accomplices, detailed plans for asset extraction, and yes, discussions about ways to potentially harm you, Mr. Ashford, once you were no longer useful. She's looking at fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy, and possibly attempted murder charges. The words should have brought satisfaction, but Claire just felt tired. And worried. What happens to Emma? She's been through so much already. Finding out that the woman her father almost married was only using them. We tell her the truth, age-appropriately, Marcus said firmly. Emma deserves honesty. She's been manipulated enough. He turned to Detective Patel. How long before this goes to trial? I need to know what kind of timeline we're looking at for my daughter's sake. Months, probably. Ms. Morse has lawyered up, expensive defense team, which is interesting given she claimed to be motivated by poverty. We're still tracking where that money came from, probably previous victims. But Mr. Ashford, you should prepare for this to be ugly and public. The media's already picking up the story: billionaire almost conned by fake fiancé makes good headlines. Claire saw Marcus's jaw tighten. The man who'd built a tech empire on protecting digital security had been spectacularly failed by his own judgment in his personal life, and the irony wouldn't be lost on the press or his competitors. Let them write what they want, Marcus said finally. What matters is Emma's safe and Victoria's stopped before she could hurt anyone else. The door opened and Margaret Ashford appeared, still elegant despite the chaos of the day, but her eyes were softer now when they looked at Marcus. Emma's asking for you. And Marcus, I owe you an apology. I've been holding Sarah's death against you for 2 years, and I was wrong. You're a good father. You made a mistake trusting the wrong person, but you protected our granddaughter when it mattered. Sarah would be proud. Something in Marcus's expression cracked at those words, the forgiveness he'd been seeking from his late wife's mother, the absolution he'd needed to fully move forward. Thank you, Mom. That means, thank you. They left the station an hour later, stepping into afternoon sunlight that felt surreal after the fluorescent harshness inside. The Ashford estate was 40 minutes away, and Claire assumed she'd take an Uber back to her own small apartment, back to Tyler and her real life, now that the crisis was over. But Marcus stopped her before she could call for a ride. Claire, we need to talk about what happens next. She felt her stomach drop, suddenly uncertain. Had she overstepped so badly that even after saving Emma, she was being let go? Mr. Ashford, I know I went beyond my position, and if you need to. I want to make you Emma's official guardian, Marcus interrupted. Legal documentation, court appointed. If anything ever happens to me, and after this, I'm very aware of my own mortality, I need to know someone who actually loves my daughter will make decisions for her. Not some distant relative or court-appointed stranger. You. Claire stared at him, unable to process the words. I'm just a maid. I have no legal standing. You're the woman who risked everything to save my daughter from a monster. You're the person Emma trusts. And legal standing can be arranged. Margaret's already drawn up papers if you're willing. Claire, you proved you'll put Emma first even when it costs you. That's exactly who I need protecting her. The offer was staggering, overwhelming. Claire thought of Tyler, of her tiny apartment, of the medical bills still piling up. She thought of Emma's face when the little girl had said, "You're mean," to Victoria, the courage it had taken for her to speak up. She thought about how some bonds weren't about blood or legal documents but about who showed up when it mattered. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, I'll do it. But Mr. Ashford, Marcus, I need something too. Name it. Tyler's asthma treatments, they're expensive. My insurance doesn't cover everything. And I'll need childcare help if I'm going to be more involved in Emma's life. I can't leave my son alone to do this. We come as a package. Marcus's expression softened into something like respect. Done. Full family health coverage, childcare support, and Claire, you're not a maid anymore. You're family. We'll figure out the details, but your only job now is making sure Emma's okay. Everything else, we handle together." The word family settled into Claire's chest, warm and unexpected. She'd spent 3 years cleaning the Ashford estate, watching from the margins of their life. Now she was being invited into the center of it, not as help but as something more fundamental, as the person trusted with their most precious thing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tyler's school. "Mom, Mrs. Chen says you're on the news. Are you famous now? Also, can we have pizza tonight?" Claire laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that released some of the tension she'd been carrying. "My son wants to know if I'm famous and if we can have pizza." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the wedding day that never happened. "Tell him yes to both. And tell him he's invited to dinner at our place tomorrow. Emma's been asking about the kid whose mom saved her dad. They should meet." As they walked to Marcus's car, Claire looked back at the police station where Victoria Morse was being processed, where a woman's carefully constructed con had finally collapsed under the weight of her own cruelty and greed. She thought about how easily it could have gone differently, if she'd been too scared to speak up, if Marcus hadn't believed her, if Emma had been sent to Switzerland before the truth came out. But they'd stopped it. Together. A billionaire, a maid, and an elderly lawyer who'd been underestimated by a woman who thought wealth was the only power that mattered. And now came the harder part, helping a 7-year-old heal from betrayal, rebuilding trust, and figuring out what family meant when traditional definitions had already failed. The sun was setting as they drove home, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded Claire of new beginnings, and somewhere in the back seat of the car, her phone held the recordings and evidence that would put Victoria Morse in prison for years, but more importantly it held Tyler's text asking about pizza, and that felt like the real victory, being able to go home to her son and tell him that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying, actually worked out, though none of them knew yet that the true test was still coming because trauma didn't heal overnight and Emma had questions about love and trust and why people pretended to be good when they weren't, and answering those questions honestly without destroying a 7-year-old's faith in humanity would be harder than any sting operation. 6 months later, the Ashford estate garden looked like something from a children's book, Emma and Tyler building elaborate fairy houses from sticks and flowers while Claire watched from a bench, coffee in hand and peace in her heart for the first time in years. The media circus had been brutal but brief. Victoria Morse's trial had been expedited when she'd taken a plea deal rather than face the overwhelming evidence, accepting 15 years for fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh on the attempted harm to a minor aspect, and Victoria's expensive lawyers had advised her that a jury would have no sympathy for a woman who'd targeted a grieving widower and his daughter. She'd disappeared into the federal prison system, and Emma had only asked about her once. Did Victoria ever really like me at all? Marcus had answered honestly, no, probably not, and Emma had nodded and never brought her up again. Therapy had helped. Dr. Lisa Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma and betrayal, had worked with Emma twice a week, helping her process the complex feelings of having been manipulated by someone she'd trusted. Tyler had joined some sessions when Emma asked if he could, and the two 7-year-olds had formed a friendship built on shared understanding. They both knew what it felt like when adults let you down, and they both knew what it felt like to be protected by someone who actually cared. Claire's role in the household had transformed completely. She had an office now, not a supply closet. Her title was officially family coordinator and guardian, though really she was something between a nanny, a manager, and extended family. Margaret had expedited the guardianship papers, and Claire's name now appeared on legal documents as Emma's secondary guardian, with full authority to make decisions if Marcus was unavailable. It still felt surreal sometimes. The health insurance Marcus had provided meant Tyler's asthma was finally under control, his treatments regular and effective. The childcare support meant Claire could actually sleep at night instead of juggling 3 jobs. And the salary Marcus insisted on paying her, because you saved my daughter and my company, Claire, this is non-negotiable, meant she'd paid off 2 years of medical debt and actually had savings. But more than the financial security, what mattered was the family they'd accidentally built. Marcus and Emma, Claire and Tyler, Margaret visiting weekly with her sharp humor and fierce protectiveness, they'd become something that didn't fit traditional definitions but worked anyway. "Mom, Emma says I can stay over on Friday." Tyler called from the garden, his face dirt-smudged and happy. "Can I? Mr. Ashford said he'd teach us about firewalls and stuff." Claire laughed. "As long as you two promise to actually sleep instead of hacking into something you shouldn't." "We only did that once," Emma protested, though she was grinning. "And we fixed it after." Uncle Marcus said it showed initiative. "Uncle Marcus needs to stop encouraging you," Claire said, but she was smiling. The easy affection between Marcus and both kids, the way he treated Tyler with the same patient attention he gave Emma, had healed something in her son that years of single parenting couldn't quite reach. Tyler finally had a positive male role model. Marcus emerged from the house carrying a tray of lemonade and sandwiches, moving with the confidence of a man whose world had been shaken but had restabilized on firmer foundations. He'd sold a significant portion of Ashford's security after the Victoria scandal, wanting to step back from the corporate grind and focus on being present for Emma. Richard Chen had resigned, accepting his own plea deal for his role in Victoria's scheme. The company was smaller now, more manageable, and Marcus seemed genuinely happier. "Picnic's ready," he announced. "Claire, you staying?" It was a question he asked every afternoon, even though the answer was always yes these days. Claire had officially moved into the guest house 3 months ago, a separate space for her and Tyler but close enough to be part of Emma's daily life. It meant stability for both kids, built-in friendship, and the kind of community single parenting had never allowed her before. As they ate sandwiches and the kids plotted elaborate schemes for their fairy village, Margaret arrived with homemade cookies and the sharp observation that Emma looked taller. "She's growing up," Margaret said, settling beside Claire on the bench. "6 months ago, I wasn't sure we'd get here," to her laughing again, trusting again. "You did that, Claire. You and Marcus together." "She did the hard work," Claire said quietly, watching Emma teach Tyler how to braid grass stems. "We just kept her safe while she healed." "That's all kids need, really," Margaret mused. "Adults who keep them safe and tell them the truth." Victoria would have destroyed her. That woman saw Emma as an obstacle instead of a child. "It makes me furious all over again." "But she's stopped now," Marcus said, joining them. "And Emma's safe. That's what matters." The afternoon drifted into evening, the kind of easy family time that felt ordinary but was actually extraordinary in its peace. When Tyler and Emma fell asleep on a blanket in the garden, Claire covered them gently and sat back down beside Marcus. "I've been thinking," Marcus said quietly, "about how you told me once that some bonds aren't about blood or legal documents but about who shows up when it matters. I think that's what we've built here, a family based on showing up." Claire nodded, looking at the sleeping children, at Margaret gathering dishes, at the garden that had witnessed so much pain but now held laughter. "Emma asked me yesterday if she could call me Aunt Claire. She said it felt right." "What did you tell her?" "I said yes. If you're okay with it." Marcus's smile was soft and genuine. "I'm more than okay with it. Claire, you've given Emma something I couldn't after Sarah died. You've shown her that women can be trusted, that not everyone who seems kind is hiding cruelty. That's a gift I can never repay. You gave me and Tyler security and family," Claire said. "I'd say we're even." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the estate, painting everything in golden light that spoke of endings and beginnings and the complicated beauty of second chances. 6 months ago, Claire had forced a billionaire to pretend he was paralyzed to save his daughter, and everyone thought she was crazy. But looking at Emma sleeping peacefully, at Tyler beside her, at the life they'd all built from the wreckage of Victoria's schemes, Claire knew she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because some things were worth the risk. Some children were worth saving. And some families, the ones built on loyalty and sacrifice and showing up when it mattered most, were stronger than any that biology or law could create. The fairy houses in the garden would be gone by morning, washed away by sprinklers or dismantled by wind, but the foundation they'd built, of trust and honesty and fierce protection, that would last. And for a maid who'd once been invisible, for a billionaire who'd almost lost everything, and for 2 children who'd learned that real love wasn't about perfection but about people who stayed when things got hard, that was everything that mattered.